Two people can watch the same event and walk away with completely different conclusions. One person is insulted and becomes angry. Another hears the same words and shrugs. One person grows up in hardship and becomes bitter. Another grows up in similar hardship and becomes compassionate. Why? What changed? Were they truly choosing? Or were their reactions simply the inevitable result of genetics, conditioning, brain chemistry, and circumstance? That question has become one of the most fiercely debated in modern philosophy and neuroscience. Because the more we learn about the brain, the more some begin to wonder whether free will exists at all. Perhaps every thought you have, every preference, every decision, every emotional reaction was determined long before you became consciously aware of it. Perhaps your sense of choice is only the feeling of authorship, not authorship itself. And if that's true, then what exactly are you? A witness? A passenger? A biological machine watching itself make decisions it never truly made? It's an unsettling thought, but then comes an even stranger complication. Many spiritual traditions, including the Law of One, suggest that portions of your life may have been planned before you were even born. Certain relationships, certain hardships, certain catalysts, which raises an obvious question. If parts of your life are planned, and your biology influences your behavior, and your environment shapes your beliefs, then where exactly is free will? Is it real? Or is it simply one more comforting illusion, another story consciousness tells itself? According to the Law of One, free will is not only real, it is far more than that. It is the first movement of creation itself, the first distortion of infinity, the principle through which the Creator fractured perfect unity into infinite experience. In this view, the universe does not merely contain free will, the universe exists because of it. So, if that's true, then why does choice so often feel constrained? Why do we seem shaped by forces beyond our control? Why is truth hidden? Why is suffering allowed? And why would an infinite creator design reality around uncertainty instead of clarity? To understand that, we first need to understand what the law of one means when it says that free will came first. According to the law of one, before stars, before space, before time, before matter, before anything that could be measured, there was only unity. Not a universe, not empty space, not even darkness, because darkness still implies the existence of space to be dark within. There was only undifferentiated being, infinite awareness, infinite potential, what Ra calls intelligent infinity, a state of absolute unity. No separation, no movement, no form, no quote unquote other, no subject and object, no observer and observed, only total, undivided oneness. And here the mind begins to run into its limits, because this is not something easily visualized. The human brain prefers things with edges, shapes, boundaries, preferably things we can point at and say, ah, yes, that is the cosmic soup. Unfortunately, pre creation reality was somewhat lacking in conveniently pointable objects. But according to Ra, within this infinite unity, there arose the first distortion free will. Ra states, the first known thing in the creation is infinity. The infinity is creation. Infinity became aware. This was the next step. Awareness led to the focus of infinity into infinite energy. You have called this by various vibrational sound complexes, the most common to your ears being logos or love. The creator is the focusing of infinity as an aware or conscious principle called by us as closely as we can create understanding learning in your language, intelligent infinity. There was infinity. Infinity became aware. Awareness finds focus, which is logos or love. But before that awareness was able to focus, the first distortion of the law of one needed to occur. This first distortion is called free will, as noted throughout the material. And this is one of the strangest ideas in the entire material, that the first act of creation was not the making of matter, but the emergence of choice, the possibility of differentiation, the possibility that infinity could move in one direction rather than another, could explore one expression rather than another, could become this instead of that. Why call it a distortion? Because in law of one terminology, anything that departs from absolute unity, even in a creative or beautiful way, is technically a distortion. Not because it is flawed, not because it is corrupt, but because it is a shaping of the unshaped. a bending of the perfectly undifferentiated whole into something particular. And free will is the first such bending, the first departure from perfect stillness, the first cosmic what if. What if infinity explored itself this way? What if consciousness experienced itself through limitation? What if unity fractured into perspectives so that it could know itself through contrast? Because this is the key idea. According to the law of one, unity alone cannot know itself experientially. It simply is. There is no contrast, no perspective, no relationship, no experience. If all is one, there is no other, then there is nothing through which the creator may observe itself. No mirror, no reflection, no differentiation, so free will becomes the mechanism through which the one knows itself, through which the creator fragments itself into perspectives, not because it is broken, but because multiplicity allows self knowledge. And this is why free will arose from infinity. It is explained when question 27.9 is asked about having total freedom of choice in order to know itself. The creator, in this view, does not create the universe as an engineer builds a machine. It creates the universe as consciousness creates a dream, by generating perspectives through which to encounter itself. And from that first distortion of free will emerges the second great principle, love, or more precisely, the logos, the creative principle, the organizing intelligence that takes possibility and begins structuring it into actual systems of experience. This logos then designs realities, entire systems of law, galaxies, stars, planetary systems, archetypal frameworks, even the rules governing consciousness itself. Meaning, according to the law of one, the universe is not random, nor is it merely mechanical. It is designed, structured, authored. But crucially, its design emerges after free will. Free will comes first, always, before law, before order, before structure, before light. So, in the law of one framework, free will is not simply a trait that conscious beings possess. It is not just your ability to choose chocolate over vanilla, or to text your ex after midnight against all available wisdom. It is far deeper than that. Free will is the metaphysical principle upon which all creation is built. It is the reason there are countless logoi, countless star systems, countless archetypal experiments, countless ways reality itself may be structured. Because the creator is not running one simulation, it is exploring infinity. And infinity requires variation, infinite possibility, infinite experimentation, infinite expressions of selfhood. Which means this: if free will is the first principle of creation, then preserving it would be among the highest priorities in the architecture of reality, perhaps even above comfort, above efficiency, above clarity, above the immediate elimination of suffering. And if that's true, then many of the universe's strangest features begin to make more sense. Why truth is hidden, why certainty is rare, why spiritual knowledge remains ambiguous, why the Creator does not simply appear in the sky and settle all debates by Tuesday afternoon. Because perhaps a universe built for genuine choice must preserve uncertainty. And perhaps the reason reality feels veiled is because without the veil, free will itself would be compromised. If free will is truly sacred, if it is the first principle of creation itself, then one implication follows almost immediately. Choice must be protected. Not simulated, not assumed, but protected. Because for a choice to be meaningful, it must be freely made. And for it to be made freely, it cannot be coerced. It cannot be forced. And perhaps most importantly, it cannot be made under conditions of absolute certainty. Because if ultimate truth were undeniable, if the Creator stood visibly before humanity, if the structure of reality were proven beyond dispute, if every person knew with certainty why they are here, what happens after death, which path is spiritually correct, and what choices lead to evolution, then much of what we call choice would no longer be choice. It would be compliance. It would be optimization. It would be behavior under perfect information. And that is not the same thing. Ra repeatedly suggests that mystery is not an accident of existence, it is a necessity. A universe built for free beings must contain uncertainty, because uncertainty preserves authentic decision making. This is one reason the Confederation claims to be extremely cautious in offering proof. Throughout the material, Ra continually avoids direct proof. This is not accidental restraint, it is policy. cosmic, metaphysical, occasionally frustrating policy. Ra avoids prediction, avoids spectacle, avoids giving information that would eliminate the seeker's need for discernment. Why? Because certainty can become coercion. If spiritual truth is obvious, then faith disappears, seeking disappears, discernment disappears, and perhaps most importantly, the purity of one's choice disappears. This principle extends far beyond channeled contact. It may explain why reality itself feels hidden, why mystical experiences are personal rather than universal, why synchronicities are suggestive but deniable, why spiritual insight often arrives through intuition rather than undeniable proof, and why the deeper truths of existence seem forever balanced between revelation and plausible dismissal. Enough evidence to invite seeking, never enough to compel belief. And this same logic may explain one of the central features of incarnation itself, the veil. According to the law of one, before incarnating into third density, the conscious mind forgets. It forgets its larger identity, its past lives, its pre incarnative plans, its unity with the Creator, its reason for entering the incarnation. Why? Because without forgetting, choice would be weakened. If you entered life remembering, I am an eternal soul. My suffering is temporary. My enemies are other versions of myself. Love advances me spiritually. Forgiveness accelerates my evolution. Then the lessons of incarnation would become dramatically easier. Not effortless, but easier. The stakes would feel different. The uncertainty would diminish. Faith would become memory. Courage would become calculation. Compassion would become strategy. But under the veil, you don't know. You hope. You intuit. You suspect. You wrestle with doubt. And within that uncertainty, your choices become real in a deeper way. Because now, to forgive someone who hurt you is not merely intelligent, it is a leap. To serve others is not merely efficient, it is sacrificial. To seek truth is not merely obvious, it is an act of will. In this framework, confusion is not evidence of abandonment. It is not proof that reality is meaningless. It may be evidence that reality is carefully constructed to preserve the integrity of your choices. The universe may be hidden, not because no one is there, but because too much certainty would interfere with why you came. If free will is the first principle of creation and confusion exists to preserve it, then the next question becomes why? Why structure an entire density of existence around uncertainty, just so beings can choose? According to the law of one, because choice is the point. Third density is not primarily a realm for comfort, which, to the disappointment of nearly everyone currently incarnated here, does appear intentional. Not for pleasure, not even for knowledge. It is a realm for polarization, a realm designed around decision. Ra says plainly, the purpose of incarnation in third density is to learn the ways of love. But crucially, love, in the law of one, is not treated merely as an emotion, not sentiment, not affection, not vague positivity. Love is orientation, a chosen way of being, a directional movement of consciousness toward unity or away from it. Because third density presents each soul with a central task to decide how it will relate to other selves. Will it serve them or use them? Will it recognize unity or exploit separation? Will it open or close? This is why the law of one calls third density the density of choice. And that choice cannot be made theoretically. It cannot be made by simply agreeing with spiritual philosophy. It cannot be made by intellectually preferring kindness in the abstract. It must be made under pressure, under ambiguity, under catalyst. Because anyone can claim to value compassion until compassion costs them something. Anyone can claim forgiveness matters until betrayal arrives. Anyone can claim to seek truth until truth threatens the identity they've built. Third density, then, is structured to generate situations that force orientation, catalyst, conflict, temptation, loss, desire, fear, pain, inconvenience, frustration. The endless parade of circumstances that seem, at first glance, to be life merely happening to you. But in the law of one framework, these experiences are not random interruptions to your spiritual path. They are not detours from the curriculum. They are the curriculum. They are the path. Each one presents a choice, not always a grand one, usually not. Often the choices are quiet, private, invisible to everyone else. Do you react with patience or irritation? Humility or pride? Compassion or judgment? Honesty or convenience? Forgiveness or resentment. Again and again, moment after moment. Incarnation presents opportunities to orient the self. And over time, those repeated choices become polarity. A being is not polarized by one noble act or one cruel act, but by the consistent pattern of chosen orientation, which means, from the law of one perspective, your spiritual evolution is not determined primarily by what happens to you. It is determined by how you choose to meet what happens. Two people may endure the same suffering and emerge spiritually very different. One closes, one opens. One becomes hardened, one becomes compassionate. One uses pain as justification for separation. Another uses pain as catalyst for understanding. Their circumstance does not determine the polarity, the response does. And that may be one of the most radical claims in the entire philosophy, that the deepest purpose of human life is not to avoid difficulty, but to use difficulty as the raw material of conscious choice. Not because suffering is inherently good, not because pain is desirable, but because challenge creates friction, and friction reveals orientation. Without difficulty, many virtues would remain hypothetical. Patience requires delay, forgiveness requires injury, compassion requires suffering, courage requires fear, and faith requires uncertainty. So, in this framework, third density is not a punishment, not a prison, not an arbitrary waiting room before higher realms. It is an extraordinarily refined environment engineered for one purpose: to allow consciousness to choose what it will become. At this point, a skeptic might object, and fairly so, because even if the law of one claims free will is fundamental, human experience does not always feel that way. Many of our thoughts seem automatic, many of our reactions seem involuntary, many of our patterns were formed long before we had any conscious say in them. So the argument against free will usually begins here. If my genetics influence my temperament, if my childhood shapes my psychology, if trauma rewires my nervous system, if brain chemistry affects my emotions, if subconscious programming drives my behavior, then in what sense am I truly choosing? Am I choosing? Or am I simply the endpoint of biological and environmental causes mistakenly calling that process me? It is a serious argument, and to be fair, if one looks only at the surface mechanics of human behavior, it can appear extremely persuasive, and the law of one would not dismiss it, because from this perspective, conditioning is real, bias is real, trauma is real, chemical imbalance is real, subconscious patterning is real. The law of one does not suggest incarnation drops a perfectly neutral consciousness into a perfectly neutral environment. Quite the opposite. It suggests incarnation is deliberately structured to place consciousness inside limitation, inside distortion, inside bias, inside forgetting, inside bodies and minds that constrain perception. Why? Because free will is not demonstrated when choosing between equal and effortless options. It is demonstrated precisely when choice is difficult, precisely when one must choose despite internal resistance, despite fear, despite conditioning, despite pain. In this framework, your distortions do not eliminate free will, they create the conditions under which meaningful free will may be exercised. To put it another way, the law of one would likely say you are not judged spiritually for having distorted impulses. You are polarized by how you respond to them. Anger arising is not the choice. What you do with anger is. Fear arising is not the choice. What you do with fear is. Trauma may shape your instincts, but it does not fully dictate how you consciously work with them over time. And this is important. The law of one does not imply that everyone has equal difficulty. Some incarnations carry heavier burdens than others. Some people inherit deeper trauma, harder catalysts, more severe distortion, more difficult psychological conditions. Check out our episode on the entities of Mars and Maldek for a good example of extreme traumatization. The path is not equal in comfort, nor equal in difficulty, but each incarnation is tailored to provide catalysts appropriate to that soul's learning, which means the standard is not, did you have perfect freedom from distortion? The standard is, what did you do with the freedom available to you? Even if only a little, even if imperfectly, even if painfully. You may not choose every thought, you may not choose every wound, you may not choose your nervous system's first reaction, but perhaps you choose what happens next. And if that's true, then free will is not disproven by conditioning. It is made meaningful by it. Because choosing love when love is easy proves very little. Choosing understanding when understanding costs you something reveals far more. So, from the law of one perspective, the question is not, are you perfectly free from influence? The question is, given your distortions, given your wounds, given your conditioning, given your fear, what do you choose anyway? Of course, even after all that, many objections remain, and some of them are serious. Because if free will exists, it must survive contact with reality. It must survive contact with biology, with trauma, with suffering, with neuroscience, with the obvious inequalities of life. So let's test the idea. Not sentimentally, but directly. If a philosophy of free will collapses the moment neuroscience enters a room, it was probably not a very durable philosophy to begin with. Objection 1: Causal determinism. Everything has a prior cause. Every thought, every desire, every action is simply the next domino falling. If every event is caused by prior events, then how can choice be real? The law of one response would be causality may govern the conditions of incarnation, but not necessarily the orientation of consciousness within those conditions. In other words, you may not choose what arrives, but you may choose how to meet it. Determinism may explain the stage, it does not fully explain the actor. But the law of one fights determinism more deeply, which will be the topic of a future episode. Objection 2: Genetics and biology. Some people are naturally more aggressive, more anxious, more impulsive, more empathetic. So, how can free will exist if biology shapes temperament? The law of one would likely say biology is part of the catalyst, part of the incarnation design. A predisposition is not a verdict, it is a starting condition. A soul may incarnate with difficult wiring precisely because working through that wiring is part of the lesson. Objection 3: Childhood and environmental conditioning. People are shaped by parents, culture, trauma, education, social pressure. By adulthood, much of the personality is already programmed. The law of one responds, yes. And that programming is part of the incarnation. The point is not to begin unconditioned. The point is to become conscious of one's conditioning and choose what to do with it. Awakening, in this sense, is partially the process of noticing the script before deciding whether to keep reading from it. Objection 4: Neuroscience, the Lebet experiment. Brain activity appears to begin before conscious awareness of decision. The brain decides before you know you've decided. So consciousness may not be the author at all. The law of one perspective might be conscious awareness is not the entirety of self. The deeper mind, subconscious mind, higher self, and incarnational programming all participate in the self. Ra repeatedly emphasizes that the conscious mind is only a small portion of the total mind complex, more surface than substance. In modern terms, the part of you narrating your thoughts may not be the part doing most of the thinking. So, unconscious pre processing does not necessarily disprove free will. It may simply suggest that more of you exists than the waking ego realizes. Objection 5: The luck swamping argument. If who you are is mostly determined by luck, your genes, upbringing, culture, opportunities, then your choices are downstream from luck. The law of one response? Precisely. Incarnation is intentionally unequal. Catalyst is intentionally varied. The spiritual question is not, were your circumstances fair? It is, what did you do with the circumstances given? Objection 6: The lottery of birth. Why is one person born into privilege while another is born into starvation or war? How can free will matter under such disparity? The law of one answer would be free will does not require equal circumstances. It requires meaningful capacity for orientation within circumstance. Two souls may face radically different lessons because they seek radically different catalysts. Hardship is not proof of abandonment, nor is comfort proof of advancement. Objection 7: Random suffering. What about a child with cancer? What possible free will lesson exists there? The law of one's answer here is difficult and uncomfortable. It would suggest that not all suffering is punitive nor meaningless, but may function as catalyst for multiple souls involved: the child, the parents, the caregivers, the surrounding community, and in some cases, as pre incarnatively chosen experience. The material also adds another unusual layer: that disease itself is not viewed merely as a malfunction, but as part of the body's design capacity to cease viability, a built in mechanism through which incarnation might end when appropriate. In that framework, illness is not always seen as an accident of biology, but as one of the means through which the physical vehicle remains mortal and through which certain incarnational exits may occur. Whether one accepts those explanations is another matter. But within the framework, suffering is never viewed as random. Objection 8. Heat of the moment reactions. People lash out before thinking. Fear, rage, panic, lust, all can override reason instantly. Where is free will in those moments? The law of one response. Those moments may reveal polarization more honestly than calm ones, because when pressure rises, conditioning surfaces, and the work of spiritual evolution becomes refining the self such that even under pressure, one's chosen orientation remains. Objection 9. Marketing, propaganda, and algorithms. Modern humans are constantly manipulated by media, advertising, social engineering, algorithmic feedback loops. Are most people even thinking for themselves anymore? The law of one response. External influence can distort perception, but cannot fully remove responsibility for discernment. Manipulation increases difficulty. It does not erase agency. Objection 10. Addiction and compulsion. What about those trapped in addiction? Where is free will when compulsion dominates behavior? The law of one would likely say addiction may severely constrain available choice, but constrained choice is not absent choice. The path may become narrower, harder, more painful, but spiritual work may still occur, even in very small decisions. Sometimes the most polarized act available to a person is not dramatic transformation, but one honest moment of self awareness. So, after all of that, the law of one does not present free will as unlimited freedom. It presents it as something narrower, but perhaps more profound. The persistent capacity of consciousness to orient itself within limitation, not freedom from circumstance, freedom within circumstance. Now, by this point, another question naturally arises. If the circumstances of life are tailored, if catalysts may be chosen before birth, if certain hardships are planned in advance, then is life really free? Or is it scripted? Because this is where many people encounter what seems like a contradiction. The law of one says your incarnation may involve pre selected catalysts, chosen relationships, chosen limitations, chosen lessons, chosen opportunities for growth. And yet, it also insists free will remains paramount. How can both be true? The law of one's answer is subtle. You may choose the curriculum without choosing every answer. Pre-incarnative planning in this framework is not the writing of a rigid script. It is the designing of conditions, the arranging of probable catalysts, the setting of the stage, not the dictation of your response. Ra discusses this repeatedly. The higher self and the mind body spirit complex may arrange experiences, but the incarnate entity remains free to respond however it chooses. To use an analogy, it is less like writing a movie in advance and more like selecting the terrain of a journey. You may choose to walk through the mountains, but not exactly how you will react when the climb begins. You may choose difficult parents, but not predetermine every emotional response to them. You may choose illness, but not fully know whether it will make you bitter, humble, fearful, or compassionate. You may choose poverty, but not whether you will meet it with resentment, ingenuity, despair, or generosity. The catalyst may be selected, the response is not. That distinction is the entire mechanism. Remove it, and incarnation becomes theater rather than transformation. And that distinction is everything, because if responses were predetermined, then polarity would be meaningless. No growth could occur, no authentic seeking could occur, no real choice could occur. In this view, pre-incarnative planning creates the classroom. Free will determines how the lesson is met. And importantly, the law of one does not suggest every event is meticulously planned. Only the major themes, key relationships, certain opportunities and pressures, these all may be arranged probabilistically. The rest unfolds dynamically through the interplay of your choices, others' choices, collective choices, and the unpredictable complexity of shared incarnation. So rather than fate versus free will, the law of one proposes something more nuanced, a co authored life, partly designed, partly improvised, structured enough to teach, open enough to remain real. Which means, from this perspective, your life may have purpose without being rigidly predetermined. Your suffering may contain intention without your reactions being forced. Your challenges may be meaningful without being inescapable. And perhaps most importantly, the existence of pre planned catalysts does not remove responsibility. Because no matter what was chosen before birth, the spiritual work still happens here, in the present moment, through what you decide to do with what arrives. And this brings us to perhaps the most uncomfortable implication of all. If free will is truly sacred, if it is the first principle of creation, then free will must include the freedom to reject unity, the freedom to reject compassion, the freedom to dominate, to manipulate, to exploit, to harm. Because if only quote unquote good choices were permitted, then goodness would not be chosen. It would be enforced. And enforced goodness is not goodness at all, it is compliance. The law of one therefore presents a startling idea that even the negative path, service to self, exists because the Creator values free will so deeply that it permits consciousness to explore separation itself. Ra describes both positive and negative polarity as valid paths of evolution, not equal in harmony, but equally permitted. Why? Because the Creator seeks to know itself through all possible experience, not merely pleasant experience, not merely virtuous experience, all experience, even darkness, even separation, even the illusion that one may stand apart from the whole and place the self above all others. In this framework, evil is not evidence that the Creator has lost control, nor that reality lacks order, nor necessarily that darkness serves no purpose. Rather, darkness exists because a universe of real freedom must permit beings to misuse that freedom. And perhaps more importantly, because resistance creates the possibility of meaningful polarity. Without selfishness, selflessness has little meaning. Without cruelty, compassion is less costly. Without temptation, discipline is untested. Without fear, courage remains theoretical. There must be an antithesis to all in order to create balance. Without the possibility of separation, the return to unity would be automatic rather than chosen. And that, according to this philosophy, would defeat the purpose. Because the Creator does not seek robotic harmony, it seeks conscious reunion, a return to unity, chosen freely, after the exploration of separation. This does not mean the law of one glorifies evil. Far from it. Negative polarity is repeatedly described as difficult, painful, and ultimately unsustainable beyond a certain point of development. Ra explains that after fifth density graduation, wisdom must be balanced with an equal amount of love, and that this becomes very, very difficult for the negative path. Eventually, the sixth density negative entity recognizes what Ra calls spiritual entropy, caused by this inability to express unity, and it chooses an instantaneous reorientation towards the positive path. I want to put up some important quotes that may help some reorient themselves to save some time. For after fifth density graduation, wisdom is available, but must be matched with an equal amount of love. This love light is very, very difficult to achieve in unity when following the negative path and during the earlier part of the sixth density. Society complexes of the negative orientation will choose to release the potential and leap into the sixth density positive. The sixth density negative entity is extremely wise. It observes the spiritual entropy occurring due to the lack of ability to express the unity of sixth density. Thus, loving the Creator and realizing at some point that the Creator is not only self, but other self as self, this entity consciously chooses an instantaneous energy reorientation so that it may continue its evolution. In sixth density, the density of unity, the positive and negative paths must take in each other, for all now must be seen as love light and light love. This is not difficult for the positive polarity, which sends love and light to all other selves. It is difficult enough for service to self polarized entities that at some point the negative polarity is abandoned. In other words, separation can evolve very far, but it cannot evolve forever. But it is permitted, because to forbid it entirely would violate the very principle upon which creation rests. So, in this view, the existence of darkness is not proof that the system has failed. It may be proof that freedom is genuine, that love is not mandatory, that compassion is not programmed, that unity is not forced, and perhaps that is what makes positive polarization meaningful at all. To choose love when hatred is possible, to choose forgiveness when vengeance is available, to choose understanding when judgment would be easier, to choose unity in a world built to make separation seem convincing. So, if the law of one is correct, then free will is not merely a feature of human life. It is not just one philosophical concept among many. It is the foundation upon which creation itself is built, the first distortion, the first movement away from undivided infinity. the principle through which the Creator fractured unity into perspective so that it may know itself. And if that's true, then perhaps the purpose of your life is not simply to endure experience, but to choose within it. Not once, not in some grand cinematic moment, but constantly, quietly, in the ordinary places, in traffic, perhaps especially in traffic, in arguments, in disappointment, in temptation, in fear, in exhaustion, and heartbreak, in all the countless moments where the world places pressure on your consciousness and asks, in one form or another, who are you becoming? Because from this perspective, your life is not measured primarily by what happens to you, but by what you choose in response to what happens. Every frustration becomes catalyst. Every conflict becomes opportunity. Every wound becomes a crossroads. Every interaction becomes, in some small way, a chance to orient the self towards patience or irritation, toward honesty or convenience, toward forgiveness or resentment, toward compassion or control. And perhaps that is why reality remains uncertain, why the veil persists, why truth is hidden just enough to require seeking. Because if the purpose of incarnation is genuine choice, then certainty would undermine the exercise. If the Creator simply announced itself, if the afterlife were publicly demonstrated, if the mechanics of karma and evolution were scientifically charted, then much of what we call spiritual seeking would become mere compliance. And so perhaps the ambiguity is intentional. Perhaps the silence is not absence, but restraint. Perhaps the mystery of reality is itself a protection, a way of preserving the most sacred thing in creation, your freedom to choose. And if that is so, then free will may not simply be something you possess. It may be something you are here to use, moment by moment, choice by choice, until through countless decisions, small and large, you slowly determine what kind of consciousness you wish to become. Thank you for watching or listening. I wish you all love, light, peace, and joy. Take care.